Record on this computer. And thank you all for clicking whatever buttons Zoom asks you to click and the got it. And I will send it over to the wonderful Carolina. Thank you so much for helping me and helping all of us find our way back to this present moment over and over and over again. Um, yeah, thank you, Carolina.
Thank you. Glad to be here this morning. So I'd like to begin with just a simple quote. I usually like to find whatever this morning came up for me as a quote. And this one is, "The mind is like water. When it's turbulent, it's difficult to see clearly. And when it's calm, everything becomes clear." And so I invite you to sit back and find just a place that's comfortable for you right now in the body, where you're sitting, wherever you are in your space, in your room. And if you're comfortable closing your eyes, I invite you to close your eyes or simply gaze down to begin this practice of internal attention. And as the Buddha taught, that the practice is an individual practice as well as a group practice, a support group, what is called the Sangha, that we can sit here together in this moment in time in our lives, to be in the present moment, also supporting each other through this life, through this moment in life. And so I invite you to gather your attention from all of the places where the attention has been today, even just before we began this sit, with the attention from so many places that the attention goes to, and bring the attention to this present moment. Just noticing the awareness in the body. Asking the question, what am I aware of right now? Am I aware of thoughts? Perhaps aware of how the body feels right now, the sit bones sitting on the chair or the cushion. The hands resting on your lap or the chair. Noticing the sensations of the feet on the floor, perhaps resting on a cushion. And bringing the attention to the soles of the feet. If it's possible, bringing a sense of groundingness in this present moment through the sensations of the soles of the feet on the floor or the carpet. Or the cushion. Bringing awareness to the sensations of coolness or warmth, or neutral. And noticing how it feels to be present in this moment, physically in the body. Noticing the aliveness in the body. And welcoming the aliveness in the body. If it's possible, bringing a sense of loving awareness to this moment. And checking in for areas in the body where there may be tension. Perhaps pain, emotional or physical pain. And see if it's possible, bringing a sense of softening to those areas of the body and the mind that need softening. If you notice, or when you notice, that the mind's activity is either agitated or impatient or busy, busy with judgment of self or of life or everything else that we judge as humans. Bringing a sense of patience, compassion, and understanding to the mind. A kindness to the busyness of the mind. And letting the mind take a break for now, letting the mind rest and bringing the attention back to the sensations of the next breath. Noticing the in-breath in and the out-breath out. breathing in courage and breathing out fear. And continuing to notice the nature of the breath. Noticing the rhythm of the breath in the body. And continue to breathe in courage and breathe out fear. Allowing the breath to be a source of loving awareness. And when the mind becomes distracted again and again, we can also listen to sounds as a way of grounding ourselves in the present moment. And if possible, without judgment, allowing this moment to be just as it is. And bringing now the attention to a sense of inner goodness, our deep sense of loving kindness, loving awareness. Breathing in courage and breathing out fear. And letting the mind rest. Whenever possible. And we'll finish this part of the session and our sit with the self-compassion touch, bringing your right hand over your heart. And feeling the sensations of the hand on heart, bringing a sense of self-compassion, loving awareness. Much needed self-compassion for all that we go through as humans, all the suffering we endure. And we need a hand. We need a hand on our heart to calm the nervous system and to bring the loving awareness needed to be present. With kindness and compassion for ourselves, for all of us here in this group this morning, and for all the beings we love in our lives, and all the sentient beings everywhere, with no exception. Thank you for your practice. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and return to our community, our loving and kind community, supporting each other through all of life, all of the joys and sufferings of life.
Thank you so much, Carolina.
Um,
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So glad we all get to sit together. And we are still the InsightLA Mindfulness and Deep Suffering Practice Group, Affinity Group. We like to call this the H.O.P.E group. And H.O.P.E stands for healing ourselves through the present experience. And so nice to be able to sit with each other in this present experience, alone and together. And thank you, Carolina, for guiding us. And I am so glad that we have back the wonderful Dr. Jamie Gamboa
Hello.
so that we can have another session, what we like to call the Sitting with Suicide series. And along with the alliteration, which Jamie is a poetry
Love it.
person, so I know you love alliteration. Sitting with Suicide series doesn't get better than that. And also,
The
I'm so
W
glad.
could be an S, then it would be much more alliteration. That may be better. So we need to work on that.
Okay, let's this week, let's brainstorm, let's work
Great.
on this.
Love
Okay.
it.
And I'm really grateful for spaces like these that we can say the word suicide and not well, I'm grateful that Inside LA had faith that not just suffering, but deep suffering, the deep suffering of grief, the deep suffering of hopelessness, the deep suffering of helplessness, the deep suffering of, I don't know if I want to do this life anymore. I'm really grateful that Inside LA believed that it's okay to invite in deep suffering. Um, because for far too long, and I think Jamie and I are going to talk about this a bit, as well as what it means to sit with suicide and what happens when we do, and how our lives can be transformed when we sit with our deep suffering, when we share our deep suffering with other people that get it. Um, I'm just really grateful that I don't have to be alone anymore with my deep suffering. And so thank you, Jamie, for being here. Well, I was going to ask you a first question, but now I'm going to ask that first question second and ask you a new first question.
Uh-oh, here we go.
Okay, here we go. Which is you might want to have a drink of coffee before I ask you this one. First question is actually, we've done this maybe 4 or 5 times now. We've had several of these series of sitting with suicide and deep suffering.
That's true.
So, what do you love, what do you like or love most? What's most gratifying for you about these sitting with suicide mindfulness conversation series? What is this doing for you in your life, and what do you like best about it?
Well, of course, it's talking to you. Before we banded together to work on sitting with suicide, it was just like us having coffee and, you know, hanging out and keeping up with one another and, talking largely because since we met at the suicide hotline, it's very important for both of us. And we both have lost friends to suicide, talking about suicide while drinking a coffee. And so now we're able to have those kinds of conversations. And actually, it turns out that we're not the only ones that want to or need to have those conversations. And I've really loved being able to have them and also to geek out about things that I'm passionate about. And also, I've really enjoyed all the familiar faces since we've been doing this for a while now. The Sitting with Suicide series and like other times when I've been a guest here at the Hope Group, I get to see familiar faces and I've gotten to know people in the context of this group, and that's been really lovely for me.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's been great for me, and others have shared, and I share their sentiment, how wonderful it is that you joined and made this a safer group, a more loving group. And so, yeah, I'm always glad when you're here. Okay, so this leads me to my second question, Doctor.
All right.
So when we were working at the hotline, it at that time it didn't really occur to me that there would be anything after prevention.
Mhm.
I grew up in a world where prevention, that's the goal, and that's it. Like the Smokey the Bear, only you can prevent forest fires. Suicide is
Sure.
something that needs to be kept at bay, and stopping and preventing that's it. That's the end of the. So, and I know that this is a lot of what we talk about here, and I'm glad that we're in our society, we're even talking about this more now, but why for so long have we been hamstrung? And why has prevention been the ceiling past which it's it's been so difficult to cross or get through? Why has prevention been the goal and nothing past it when of course there's a whole world after um the stopping? You know what I mean? Like why is it
Agreed.
prevention has been it for so long?
So to answer that, I'm gonna tell two stories, and you may have heard these before in various forms, so stop me if I'm repeating myself too much. One is, as you know, Brian, on the hotline, we're really trying to meet the person where they're at and to help ally with the part of them that does want to be alive. Because generally that's the part of them that made them want to call. They want to be alive and they want to connect and they want their story to be heard. And um, at times when, for example, somebody's already, tried to die by suicide, we would have to involve emergency services. And on the lines, we call that a rescue. And a rescue we think of as being not like the ideal situation. I remember coming back from the line once, and a friend of mine was like, "Oh, how'd it go today?" And I said, "Oh, it's an intense day. I had a couple rescues." And they were like, "Oh, good job. Congratulations." And I was very surprised by that. Like, oh, I don't think of that as like doing a good job, because that's not, one, it's not my accomplishment. Two, it's not an accomplishment at all. Um, it's not the ideal outcome. To like, again, we're trying to ally ourselves with the person. Um, Ideal situation is we don't have to involve emergency services. But for a lot of people in their minds, the idea of suicide is something you need to be rescued from. Like you are a victim of suicidal thoughts, and the ambulance needs to come in like a superhero and save you. And then you have been rescued and you are safe to live the rest of your life, is a narrative that people have, unfortunately. And what people don't realize is actually involving emergency services, in some cases, people are frightened and they do want that kind of intervention. Maybe they start to attempt and then realize, oh no, this is not what I want. I made a mistake. And other times again, they've already taken steps and then we're not able to have a conversation. At that point, there's no other option. But we don't want to take autonomy away from people. And suicidal thoughts are not something that you should or really can be rescued from. But a lot of people, I think, have that story. I told you that my friend who died by suicide went to a science fiction convention. It was a science fiction fantasy convention soon before she died. And there was one quote in this panel that she went to about like fantasy and mental health that really stuck with her. And the quote was something like how in media, in fantasy and science fiction, all the media that we're consuming and to which we're being exposed to the idea of like what mental health struggles can look like and how it's represented to people who maybe themselves struggle with it or maybe not. Mental health struggles are generally thought of as being acute. So somebody is struggling with suicidal thoughts or self-harm, or perhaps they have an eating disorder. It is addressed in one episode and then never mentioned again. It is an acute thing. It's an emergency, like a serious injury. You treat it, and then you kind of go back to your baseline and the show continues. Whereas in reality, many people have a more enduring story with mental health struggles, with suicidality, and we can't rescue somebody from their own experience and a part of them. And as we talk about all the time, deep suffering is inevitable. It's part of the human experience. It's the idea that we can rescue somebody from deep suffering and prevent deep suffering generally is not a helpful one. But it is a comforting one for people who maybe don't have that experience themselves, because then they think, okay, all we have to do is, this is another story, the story of the babies in the river, right? Bunch of babies in the river. We think, what are they doing there? We're pulling them out. But we're not really asking, because we don't have the resources to ask, who is throwing them in the river to begin with? How is this happening? So we're really focusing as a society on take the baby out of the river, but like, then what? It's a baby. It has an entire life. It needs parents. It needs care. And that's something that we often, unfortunately, don't give a lot of thought to. What's going to happen to the baby after we pull it out of the river?
Absolutely. And thank you for, answering or responding to that. And well, both those questions, maybe I'm feeling a little not nostalgic, but it's been 3 years since we've had this group, and
Yeah.
I'm really glad that this group includes these kinds of conversations where we can ask, why is it we do this? Why is it that we do that? Why is it that, again, Jamie has talked about this before, that, at the hotline, people call and parents, siblings, friends, and say, how do I fix it? How do I get them to stop thinking about suicide? And, if only there was a Superman, Batman, Spider-Man quick fix that would be neatly tidied up in 22 minutes.
Suicide superhero.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So when people, and I don't know, you can answer it either way, either a stranger off the street or maybe a client or a friend, really, and I know that all of those are quite different scenarios, but if somebody was to come to you, Jamie, and for the first time ever, again, could be a therapy client, a friend, a colleague, a stranger at a bus stop, um, and said to you, uh, I'm really struggling and I don't know how much longer I can hold on.
Mm.
What are some things that you would like? And I'm not saying to say what you would say to them, but just
Yeah.
instead, what are the messages that you hope that you could convey to them?
Hmm.
Um, because I know what society says, which is 911.
Right.
That's it.
Now that would not be my first instinct for sure. Um, One would be to thank them for sharing that with me, because that is, it's definitely a show of trust if anyone feels comfortable sharing deep suffering with you, because it is a vulnerable thing. And often people don't know how you're going to react to it. As a friend, hopefully they know me and they know I'm not going to like hit the panic button and freak out. But clients, even though I try to plant seeds that it's a safe place to talk about suicide and I'm not going to hit the panic button and call 911 if they tell me, oh, sometimes I think it would be better not to wake up. But still, it can feel like a risk because people don't want control taken away from them, understandably. They want to keep their autonomy. And in addition, they don't want to lose connection. And often, because there's shame and suicidal thoughts, the fear is this means something's really wrong with me and I'm going to lose my connection, like either to you and whatever role you have in my life, since you gave me a variety of scenarios there, or to other people in my life. Like if they knew this about me, maybe I would lose those connections. So, the second thing after thank you is this is not going to disrupt or end our connection. And we are able to, through this connection, work on again. You fish the baby out of the river. What do you do next? I, as a person, realistically, don't have all the resources to like raise all these babies, so to speak. So I can't single handedly raise all the babies that are fished out of the river and help them have the life that they deserve. But I can maybe be a bridge and like helping them get passed along to people who can. Or in this case, and this is kind of where the metaphor falls flat, um, sometimes that also means yourself and you're kind of raising your inner child instead of an actual baby. And so what that might mean is, helping somebody find mental health resources, find people, including me, but not limited to me, in the case of a friend, who they can talk to when they're in deep suffering. Um, and also like if there are any skills that I could give them to help them, put on the brake. Because we've talked so many times, Brian, about how when you're in a crisis, um, it's kind of like you are driving in unfavorable weather conditions and it's very dangerous. And if you're driving quickly, you're much more likely to get into an accident. So put on the brakes and then how to like access the toolbox that they already have inside of them that maybe has gotten lost.
Yeah, I
That
love
was
that.
three things.
Well, no, that's fantastic. And maybe maybe we'll chat for another 10 minutes or so, but I'm glad you're bringing up skills and tools and things to what next, right? Or what
Mhm.
else? Um, Instead of the mindset in the past and unfortunately still today, many many people, including therapists, y'all, including therapists. I mean, we have a lot
Unfortunately.
of work to do in our graduate schools and our training programs to help us get more comfortable talking about deep suffering. We don't do nearly a good enough, not nearly good enough, not nearly a good enough job. You know what I'm trying to say.
We got you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Talking about grief, we don't, I mean, it's atrocious how little training we get on death and dying and mourning and bereavement and grief. We don't get nearly enough on suicide. In 2 years, I had 2 hours on suicide. So, so Jamie, what you were just saying is like, okay, what can we do? And maybe my next question can be, and um, about what what happens when people, I'm thinking about tools, I'm thinking about skills. I know we had a whole session on metaphors here. What happens when someone feels and is thinking about maybe not wanting to be alive anymore, and often suffering in silence because it's very difficult to find people with whom we can talk about it. So, Jamie, how do you approach a situation where somebody is thinking about suicide, but not quite sure why? They
Mhm.
can't quite tie it to, money and financial concerns and housing insecurity or chronic. What happens when somebody is feeling suicidal, as we all do at times, but they can't quite get to the reason or reasons? Uh, because, of course, they can't talk about it with anybody. There have been, so
Right.
how would you approach something like that?
Yeah. I love that question because, as I say all the time, like excessively to the point that people are tired of hearing about it, our brains are wired to help us find meaning, solve problems, and identify patterns. And so, what happens a lot of the time when we're in a crisis is our brain flags that as a problem. And then our brain goes into problem solving mode. And the very brain that is in crisis is then trying to solve the crisis, which can unfortunately get us stuck in deep suffering in ways when, like, our brain's really just trying to help us. And so, one of the ways that can happen is trying to figure out, why am I in this crisis, or why am I experiencing this? Why am I having thoughts of suicide? And if there's a big thing you can point to, like, well, I'm having thoughts of suicide because I was just in a breakup and I don't know how I'm going to move on, or I'm having thoughts of suicide because, I just lost this person really important to me and I don't know what life is going to be like without them. And I'm not sure if I even want to live life without them. Then you have something you can point to. You have a coherent narrative for, I want to die because blank, or I'm having these thoughts because blank. But when you don't have that narrative, there's nothing you can point to. And this happens all the time. I have people who, just have a lot of different things that are happening. There's a perfect storm of some kind. Maybe somebody's experiencing some depression and they're having thoughts of suicide as part of that storm with a lot of different things whirling around. There's not one thing you can point to. The problem solving brain often identifies you as being the problem. Well, you shouldn't be having these thoughts. You have no reason to have these thoughts. You have so many good things in your life. You've got your spouse, like you're a new mom. Why are you having thoughts of suicide? What's wrong with you? And as we've talked about so many times, that creates that extra level of suffering. And so maybe to somebody who's trying to figure out the why of it, as you're saying, Brian, like, why am I having these thoughts? Um, that's where we're leaning into the acceptance piece, which doesn't mean like even you want to have these thoughts, because people have different kinds of relationships with their suicidal thoughts. Some people feel comfortable with them and others less so. Um, Having the thoughts and accepting that you're having the thoughts right now means accepting the reality as it is instead of spending bandwidth trying to fight that. And knowing that you are not the problem and your suicidal thoughts are not the problem. Um, and this is a human thing that we all experience. And there are ways that we can move through it and kind of turn down the noise, the noise being some of the things that are adding distress to your life, until things start to clear up. And when the weather conditions clear up, maybe you'll find, oh, actually, yeah, that weird clanging noise was coming from a leaky pipe. And I didn't know because there was so much other noise going on. And maybe it's just a temporary weather thing that you are moving through. It's not always important to be able to identify the why of it. And it's not required to be able to move through it. It's not the why of it's not required to move through it. Clarify.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's really, really great. And again, I like what you're saying about maybe another metaphor is like a home, like a house, a home. And from the people that I know who live in a home or own a home or renting, and maybe there's some people here or people listening later, there's all kinds of things that happen in a home all the time. There's pipes and
Yeah.
there's leaks and there's noises and there's dishwashers. If we have a dishwasher, maybe it stops working. And I've heard some people again who I know who are homeowners or renting, and they sometimes they beat themselves up. They say, "How could I not have known that this part of the house would be leaking? What a bad homeowner am I?" And it just reminded me when you were saying about the leaky pipes, and
Yeah.
I'm just imagining if or when I ever live in a home, if there's one thing going wrong, I expect that I'm going to feel overwhelmed. But what if there's four happening simultaneously?
Which is
And then,
usually the case.
which is okay, yeah. And then aren't I aren't I the problem, right? What a bad homeowner am I? And I'm the problem. And when you said before, Jamie, this is what being a homeowner is like,
Mhm.
or
A human.
this this is what it means. This is what being a human being is like. And I'm not the problem. The problem is the problem.
Right. And maybe there's not one problem you can point to. Maybe it's generalized, or maybe it's something that's out of your control. And instead of trying to solve the problem, you're trying to learn how to have a relationship with it that works for you, how to coexist with it.
Right, right. And maybe as a final kind of question discussion point for us here, speaking of tools and
I was
toolboxes,
wondering if you were going to bring
well,
this up.
so everybody, and I think we mentioned this before. In fact, I know we have because this group has been a very helpful space to talk about and get feedback about this idea of, well, what are some things that we could, using the leaky home, or the pipe that is loose, or the faucet that's not quite working right. And Jamie and I'm really proud of this, and I'm really glad, and this Hope group has been really supportive in this way, that Jamie and I have developed a toolbox. In fact, a series of toolboxes, two separate toolboxes so far, for suicidal ideation. We like to call it the suicidal ideation toolbox.
Sit.
SIT. And our Sitting with Suicide series has been a big part of that. So the acronym SIT, Suicidal Ideation Toolbox, SIT. And so that now, whether it's alone or perhaps with a trusted friend, and also toolboxes that we can use with clinicians and therapists. But what do we do if we have a leaky faucet, right?
Mhm.
And now there are some tools that we can take out of the closet if we wish to. Again, kind of like what we were starting talking about too, is can we prevent the leaks in the roof? Jamie, can you guarantee to me that you will never ever have another leak on your roof ever again?
Yeah, it's not reasonable.
No, it's not reasonable. And so maybe just to end here, maybe we can have our next Sitting with Suicide session
Yeah.
talking about some of these tools in the toolbox and suicidal ideation. And Jamie and I have on our website all the tools. And this
Right.
is again, this has
It's
been a
publicly accessible, so
publicly
you can go
accessible.
ahead and type that
And
in.
and so Jamie, can you maybe just to close, and then we'll turn off the recording, and then we'll have
Chat.
conversation, etc. So Jamie, as a homeowner,
Hmm.
as a homeowner, um, and I guess maybe your answer will be metaphorical, or maybe it won't,
Probably.
or maybe it'll be both. So what is it like as a homeowner? Okay, I think I'm asking about like having a toolbox versus not having a toolbox. What would it be like to be living in a home, which you do,
Hmm.
and going to sleep each night, imagining that you have no tools, you have no screwdrivers, you have no wrenches, you have no contact information, and anything that could happen in your home, you would be completely just right. Versus actually having a toolbox and knowing that you may not be able to stop the leak, but you wouldn't be completely helpless and powerless. Um,
Yeah.
I guess metaphorically, and also maybe share.
Yeah.
And also, if you want to just end this, I realize I'm staggering like 5 questions in a row here. I hope you're
That's
taking
okay. That's
notes.
how my brain works
Okay,
anyway.
good. Okay. And also, how how do you feel about this suicidal ideation toolbox that we've created? That now we
How
have.
I feel about it?
Well, yeah. How do you feel about it? There's this toolbox, and it's awesome. And
Well, obviously, I'm proud of it. Otherwise, I wouldn't put it online for public consumption.
yes, well, and maybe so the first one about home ownership toolbox versus no toolbox, and the second question is, how do you hope that the toolbox will feel in people's metaphorical homes, the people that
Mhm.
want to take it? And
Yeah.
then and now I'm going to shut up.
Yeah. I mean, no matter what your situation, even if like to draw on our toolbox, you're in the wilderness and you have to put up a camp, even if it's a temporary home, you have some kind of tool. Like even if you don't have the toolbox with the wrench and the screw and all the traditional types of tools, you have a phone. So you can like call you have the yellow pages, you can call someone, you have Yelp. And all of these are tools. So tools aren't always like the traditional screwdriver and hammer, and although those are great, of course. It helps to have a variety of tools because sometimes you're aware, like, okay, if I go at this with, I do have a screwdriver, but this is really, I'm out of my depth with this. I need to connect with somebody who really knows what they're doing here. Um, Sometimes what happens is, oh yeah, are you heading out, Carolina? Thank you so much for your meditation set.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Great
Absolutely.
presentation.
Have
Bye-bye.
a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Be well.
Um, yeah. But sometimes what happens is we've talked about, Brian, either you have a toolbox and it gets lost and like it's somewhere in your house, but like buried under a bunch of detritus and you don't really know exactly where it is. You have to like dig it out or like search through your closet, and that's a whole other thing. And it doesn't really feel like something you have the bandwidth for right now. Or maybe you had a toolbox and it was rusty and like not super great in some way. It served you before, but doesn't serve you anymore. And you're going to get another toolbox, but you haven't gotten it yet, which is often the case for us as humans, right? Like we have all these tools we developed when we were kids, and the tools we developed as kids in the situations we were in, they were the best that we had at the time. But now we can get a better toolbox. But that period in between of like letting go of the old one and having the new one is often very vulnerable. Because it feels like, my tools, like they weren't great. Like they kind of cut me a lot when I used them. They were rusty, but like they were tools. And now I have no tools. So all that's very vulnerable. And it helps to kind of have um, other people around who you can connect with who can share their tools. And so I hope that SIT can be that. It can be like, your neighbor, like the great Mr. Rogers, your helping neighbor, who can be like, oh yeah, I have a toolbox. You can use mine.
And something I hadn't thought of before is maybe in the sharing of tools, people can find, I can maybe, not maybe, I'm sure of it, that you and I will learn that there's tools that we hadn't even thought of before, that
Right.
other people have found helpful. And maybe going forward, we can think about ways to have yeah,
Tool
a,
sharing.
a tool sharing. Yeah, because it's not for me and you you and I to say like, okay, these are the 11 tools and that's it for
They are the
suicidal.
only ones.
These are the only
One
suicidal.
tool to rule them all. Yeah.
Right. But instead we'll find, yeah, so maybe we can think about ways to have more of a communal like food pantry kind of. That's interesting. I
Take a
hadn't thought.
tool, leave a tool. These
Take a tool,
metaphors are getting out of control, Brian.
Okay, we should stop. I'm gonna turn off the recording. Well, thank you, Jamie. And again, I'm really glad that you were able to come in April because this is our 3-year birthday celebrating. We've been doing this for 3 years, and here's to at least 3 more years of the Hope Group. And thanks so much for being here to talk about what it means to sit with suicide, why we is so important, we community connection, and also what can we what can we pull out to help, whether it's the yellow pages, the white pages, Google, whether it's a screwdriver, whether sometimes we just need a hug. I've tried fixing the sink and it's still dripping and the repair person isn't coming until tomorrow. I just need a hug. I just need a hug. And that's okay. And that's great. That's good. The things we can do. So thank you, Jamie, for being here.
Thank you. Happy birthday, Hope Group.
Happy birthday, Hope Group. Okay, I'm going to turn off the recording.